Okay, you guys are going to start by opening this file, this gradient mesh starter. We'll always use a reference image when working with a gradient mesh. So that's why I brought these images in here. A gradient mesh is a complex form of a gradient. So a typical gradient, the ones we've looked at so far, move in one direction. So like linear, it goes left to right, top to bottom, or at a specific angle. Um, with the gradient mesh, we can make it go in every direction, and it allows us to make more realistic looking designs. The gradient mesh is going to look really good on metallic things. We'll also look at it with this candle, um, which is going to be a little bit more complex. First, we're going to trace this shape. So simple rectangle, and we're going to just round the corners. Again, doesn't need to be perfect, but we want it to be close. I'm going to initially give this a very high contrast color and zoom in a little bit. Now notice how I'm trying to line this up as best as possible. Okay, that's going to be an important step as we move forward. And from here, with this selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the object menu, and I'm going to select create gradient mesh. And now it's going to pop up some rows and columns. If you need to, check this preview box, and you're going to see the little grid that it puts up here. So this is a little trial by error. So we're going to try out some different numbers, and right now you don't really know what you're doing. So just go with 3, 3. I've tested it out and it works. The reason why I picked that is because it's kind of, we see there that the gradient kind of changes here and here. All right, and we can also manually add lines later, which we'll do. So we're going to click OK. And the two keys that you want to know is two keyboard shortcuts. A for our direct selection tool, so that way we can select individual points. And then I to switch to our eyedropper. And we're going to come over here to our reference image and select the color that we think fits best. And we're going to go back and forth. A, I. Now notice what this is doing. It's creating a gradient from this anchor point to that one, from this anchor point to those, from this anchor point to that, and all the anchor points around it. So it's multi-directional. So we can select this one now and fill in one of those darker colors. We can go to our edges, and notice how the edge here is black. So I'm going to try to choose that dark black color. So this is where you're going to have to probably zoom in to do that. And look at this wraparound effect. Okay? It goes from dark to light to our main gray area. So this isn't giving us that look. All right, we don't have enough lines here, so we need to add our own line. So we need a tool to do that. That's the gradient mesh tool. A keyboard shortcut is the letter U, and it is more than likely hidden behind our gradient mesh tool. So, or I'm sorry, the gradient tool. So gradient tool looks like that. If you click and hold, you'll find it there. But keyboard shortcut letter U. And so if you click on a line with this, it will go in the perpendicular direction, the opposite direction. Okay, so if I click on this line, which is moving horizontal, it will create a vertical line. There we go. All right, so now I can take my direct selection tool, I can select this anchor point, and I can fill it with that lighter gray. And we're starting to now develop the coloring that we want. and you're going to just go around the edges here, and this is why I chose a high contrast color, so that way it is very obvious um, when you did not maybe select a point and fill it with color. All right, so we're going to take our gradient mesh tool, we're going to add another line over here, we're going to add a line that goes across up top and one across the bottom, and then fill in your colors. So after you've filled in all the colors, okay, you should have something that looks similar to this. Now, if we really wanted to take this a step further, we could add the little buttons and all the cameras and all the text. Um, you don't need to do that. I just wanted to show you how to do the gradient mesh specifically. I do want to show you how to do the apple though, because it's, again, it's just a different way to do a gradient. We don't necessarily need to do a gradient mesh for this because it's a bit more simplistic. So we'll do that. To do this on a Mac, if you have an Apple product, you should have a built-in, there's a place where they save the Apple logo for you to access. If you're doing this on a PC, you can simply just use any sort of shape. Maybe just make a circle. All right, on a Mac though, to get that Apple, if you draw a text box, and we're going to change our text to something called Palatino. And from here, we're going to go to the type menu, and we're going to select glyphs. It opens up this box. If for whatever reason you did not find the Palatino type in here, you can just select this drop down and you'll find it in here. But in here we're going to scroll through, we're looking for this apple, and there it is. I'm just going to double click it. It's going to replace all that text with the apple. And I'm done with that. All right, so right now it reads it as, Illustrator is going to read this as a font. So we need to change it into a graphic because fonts and gradients don't work so well. So I'm going to switch to my selection tool, and then I'm going to come up back to the type menu, and we're looking for this create outlines. And what that's going to do, it's going to take this text, any text, and turn it into a shape. So once I click on that, I get my shape, and now I can resize this, and it becomes a shape. So I'm just going to resize that, place that on top of the Mac or the iPad there. And so now we can just, again, apply a simple gradient to this. We're going to go to the fill, we're going to change it. We can select on our gradient options here. And maybe we'll try a 45-degree angle. My black is in the top right, where if we're trying to mimic this, I want it in the lower right. So I'm going to press the reverse gradient button, and that puts it in the lower right. And then I'm just going to play around with the gradient slider to get something that looks somewhat comparable. Again, doesn't need to be perfect, but I just want you to continue practicing using gradients. That looks pretty good. I think this would look better with a little bit of a stroke on it, just to make it look like it's more, you know, 3D, more depth. So there we go. There's like a simple example of how to do the gradient mesh. We're going to look at this next example here, though. The candle is going to be a little bit more complex. So what I see here, and again, we want to break this down into simple shapes to make it simple. And what I see here is a rectangle, a circle for the top of the candle, and maybe some sort of, you know, custom shape that we would trace with the pen tool. Maybe the wick would be a separate shape. So we got a couple different shapes here that we're going to want to make. Let's start with the candle. And again, I'm just going to create a simple rectangle to begin with. Let's give this a high contrast color and let's remove the fill. And with this, we can go up to Object and create Gradient Mesh. And I'm just going to click the preview button if it's not already. And you're going to look and kind of see, what we're looking for is with a 3D object, you're going to want to create a line on the edges. Um, and we're looking at also the vertical, like there's going to be a color change here because it's light up top, darker at the bottom. So we're going to need at least one. Um, and so I know that we're going to have to do some things that are a little bit more custom for this. So I'm just going to start with 2 by 2, knowing that I'm going to have to put some more rows and columns in manually. All right, so I'm going to switch back to my mesh tool. Again, the keyboard shortcut for that is the letter U. And I'm just going to zoom in here. I'm going to select, I want this to go vertical, up and down. So that means I need to click on a horizontal line. So I'm just going to click on the edge here. That way when I create my gradient, I can get kind of a wraparound effect. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Because it's 3D, as it gets farther away from us, it's usually darker. Okay. The other thing up top, I'm just going to kind of drag a line. I want one there and maybe one there. And that's a good starting point. And so now we can start selecting our colors. And you can let's say I select this color here, but it's not looking right for whatever reason. All right, you might have to manually just kind of force it and pick a lighter or darker color to make the design work. Okay, now that you have your base color set, we can always come back and make changes, but we're going to do the top part of the candle. And to do that, I'm just going to kind of use my circle tool and kind of try to trace it at least a little bit. And then I'm going to place it into position. From here, we're going to do object, and we're going to create grading mesh. For this one, I'm thinking 3 by 3, and actually probably 3 by 4. So let's do that and click OK. And again, we're going to just add our colors. All right, so we can now manipulate some of these lines. So notice how the wax here kind of goes up in a dimple. So we can take this anchor point, or both these anchor points, and just kind of move them up to give that effect. And you might need to um, play around with the colors here a little bit to give it that look. But that kind of gives us the, again, that darker anchor point, that back anchor point, or I guess top, would need to be darker than the one below it. And then that kind of creates that look. At the same time, we could take our rectangle here and just kind of make this more curved rather than right now it's a very straight gradient. The other thing I want to do is um, there's not much of a lip here where the two surfaces meet. So I'm going to go through and again just manually change this to a little bit darker color so that way there's a bit more definition there and a little bit more of an edge. There we go. And from there, you can play around with things. So let's just make one little wax drop. So again, this is a pretty regular shape, so I'm going to use my pen tool. And we can take that, just place it on there. For this, we don't necessarily need to add a gradient mesh to this because it's so small. What we could do is just match the color to what's right next to it and just do our best to try to blend it in. So again, try doing maybe one of them, one droplet. If you want to do more, you totally could. Let's go ahead and make this the wick here next. And I'm going to use my pen tool. You could probably, if you just want to make life easy for yourself, you could probably just use a rectangle. And with this, because there's a lot of different colors going on here, I think what we're going to have to do again is create a gradient mesh with this. So I'm going to go to Object, Create Gradient Mesh. I'm going to just keep this 2 rows, whoa, 2 rows, and I might increase the amount of columns here to 6. The reason being, doing some of this detail work down here, I think will help it look more realistic. And so I want to add the more rows and columns you have, the more detailed it's going to be. But at the same time, the more realistic it's going to look. All right, so another thing that I just added, you could do this, you don't necessarily have to for this project, but I just want to show you the little details make a big difference. So I took a circle tool, just gave it a very light color there using my eyedropper to match this color. You can see some of these other little highlights, this little swirl. So if we add stuff like that, the more detail you give stuff, the more realistic it's going to look. Again, this is just, I just want this to be a pretty quick application. You don't necessarily need to do that, but moving forward, things like that, like this, this wax droplet, those things make a difference. All right, so the next thing that I do want you to do though, and I'm going to have you try to do this on your own, is trace the flame here and add a gradient mesh to it. So I'll show you how mine ended up being. You can see I ended up with 4 columns, and I ended up with quite a few different rows. Now I probably started with 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 to get started. The reason why is because some of these are right at the edges. So if you do it automatically, it's going to evenly space everything out. And in this case, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to add them. I wanted to group them closer to the edges, top or bottom. So that's why I chose to do it manually using the gradient mesh tool. Again, the keyboard shortcut is the letter U for that. And we're just trying to line up where the color changes happen. So go ahead, try that out. Pause the video, try it out. And then when you're done, start it back up and see the next step. Okay, for this next part, we're going to create this glow that we see here. Because the white obviously blends into the background. And what I did, I just made a simple oval, filled it with a simple gradient mesh, and really any colors you want that look like fire. So reds, whites, oranges. You could maybe even do this with just a simple gradient. All right, but we're going to do something else to take it a little step further to kind of fade the edges of this a little bit. So I'm going to select it. You're going to go to Effect and Stylize, and you're going to select Feather. That will open up this dialog box and just kind of play around with some numbers again, depending on how big or small you made your candle. Everyone's size is going to be a little bit different. I'm going with 11, and you'll see what it does. It feathers the edges of this. Now we can put this on top and just make sure you send it to the back, and there's your glow. So once we're done with this, you could group it, and we can the advantage to having this as a vector, we can resize it without it getting pixelated. We can make copies of this very easily. If we wanted to put a black background behind it, it would look really good. And I'll just show you one of the ways that I've used this. So here's a simple completed design and a way that you could use this. Be great for like a Christmas type thing is what I think of. All right. You don't have to do this. All I expect you to do at this point, show me that you made the candle, show me that you made the iPad. You can take a screenshot of this. You could just upload the Illustrator file, however you can get it to me, would be great.